ॐ देवीं वाचमजनयन्त देवास्तां विश्वरूपाः पशवो वदन्ति सा नो मन्द्रेशमूर्जन्युहानाधेनुर्वागस्मानुपसुष्टुतैतु. My pranams and greetings to everyone present here. Bowing down to the reverential memory of Pujya Swamiji Dayanand Saraswati ji, in whose revered memory this conference is organized. I would like to extend my humble pranams to Swamini Atma Prajnananda ji Saraswati for inviting me here, and to all the scholars, all the great people who are assembled here, to the chair of this session, Shatabdhani Dr. R. Ganesh ji, Dr. Bharat Bhushan Rath ji, and everyone present. My topic for today is the metrical beauty of Śārdūlavikrīḍitam, and I won't go into a lot of technical nuances in this talk. I shall try to make it as intelligible, as interesting as possible to everyone present here. So the reason for my choosing this topic is quite simple and straightforward. That is, metrical studies have been going on in India, not from just the past century or from the past few centuries, but from millennia, like all of us know. Chandas is termed both as a Vedanga and as a Kavyanga. Chandaf Pado Utu Vedasya, that is the saying. So Chandas is conceived as the feet of Veda. So among the six auxiliary concepts, among the limbs of the Vedas that are required to make sense of Vedic hymns, Chandas is one among them. And while we come down in time, like I said, it is one among the Vedangas as well. So what does this term mean? Chandas derives itself from the root Chada Samvarane, Chada Apavarane, or Chadi Alhade. These are some of the roots from which this word, from which we derive this word. So what do we understand by these terms? We understand that Chandas is something that conceals the inadequacy in our expression. What usually happens is, when we speak before an audience or to someone who doesn't understand the subject, our speech itself becomes inadequate. So in order to cover that inadequacy, in order to conceal our inadequacy, Chandas comes to our help. So when we express in Chandas, even though we may not understand the meaning, there is a tonal ambience that is created that draws people in. That is one of the meanings of Chandas, and that is Apavarane or Samvarane. It also gives a certain energy to our words. It also has an enthralling effect. It also impresses. That is the meaning of the other root, that is Chadi Alhade. In fact, this is the same root from which the word Chandra comes. So the things that yesterday Dr. Ganesh was relating to, the Shitalatva, Alhada Janakatva of Chandra, the pleasingness that we experience when we look at the moon, the same thing is when we hear a verse that is composed in meter. So I will quickly go to my topic, the first slide please. That is Śārdūlavikrīḍitam. Why have I chosen Śārdūlavikrīḍitam, and why this topic at all? It is because metrical studies traditionally have been going on in two major streams. One, if we look at it traditionally, we have the Pandits, we have the commentators, etc. Going about it in a lakṣya-lakṣaṇa-samanvaya fashion. So there is the definition of a meter, there is an example, Udaharana Padya, and how the example clearly fits in with the definition, that is lakṣya-lakṣaṇa-samanvaya. This is how the topic has been handled traditionally. And when we come to the modern scenario, we observe that things have been carried on, the studies on Chandas have been carried on in two different respects. One is a historical analysis. Which poet used this meter for the first time? What was the kavya in which this meter was first employed, and some such studies. The other stream in which modern scholars have concerned themselves with is statistical analysis. The number of times in which a poet has used this meter, and some such studies. So historically there has been lakṣya-lakṣaṇa-samanvaya, and in modern times there has been this statistical analysis and the historical tracing out of Chandas. But the one lacuna that we observe in this whole field of metrical research is the aesthetics of meter is not taken care of at all. The aesthetic of meters, by the term I mean the kinds of effect that certain meters have, as we all know. Sure. The meter I have chosen for today is Śārdūlavikrīḍitam. To give some basic information about the meter, all of us would have heard of it, though we might not able to recognize it when we look at it instantly, but I am very sure every lover of Sanskrit literature has heard of this meter. It becomes obvious when I go to the examples. I will come to that in a bit. So Śārdūlavikrīḍitam is a meter which has 19 letters per line. So it is a samavritta in that all the 4 lines of the meter has the same number of aksharas or letters. And the caesura or the yati is the thing where when you are reciting a meter, there comes a position in the length of the meter where you will have to take a stop and then proceed. So it is a break in the metrical rhythm that is called as yati or caesura in prosodic language, and that appears after the 12th letter in Śārdūlavikrīḍita. And what is interesting about this meter is that the part of the meter after the yatisthana, that is the last 7 letters, has given expression to many a memorable phrase in Sanskrit literature. We would have all heard of Kalaya Tasmai Namaha in Bhartrhari's famous Niti Shatakam, and Shantyai Manodiyatam, Shlagyo Vivekodayaha, some such Krishnaya Tubhyam Namaha, and some such examples. So the beautiful thing about this meter is it is naturally attuned to the linguistic rhythm of Sanskrit. Now what do I mean by that? Every language has a structure of its own, has a way in which it evolves, has a way in which it accommodates words, puts words together, puts sentences together, etc. Śārdūlavikrīḍitam is some such meter. You can see if you count the number of syllables there, the gurus or the long syllables are more in number than laghus or the short syllables. So what does this mean? Sanskrit by its very nature is a guru prachura bhasha. That means the number of words that are in the language that naturally exist have the gurus more in number. So the meters that are guru prachura by their own nature are conducive to the linguistic rhythm of Sanskrit. So going by this, harnessing its potential to express a variety of moods, a variety of sentiments, and give expression to many poets' thoughts and feelings, many poets have used this meter. So it is not just the words that are seeded words that are always there, already there, but poets are by nature creative. They want to coin their own phrases, come up with newer and newer words, and Sanskrit itself as a language gives so much ample opportunity to come up with newer words. So poets use that. To give an example, there is the word Kamala. It means lotus. It is just a 3-syllabled word, whereas we know in Sanskrit the poetic convention assumes or expects us to assume that a lotus is the beloved of the sun. So Surya Pranayini, Kamalam. So by using this concept, poets can create newer and newer words. For instance, there is the word Trayitanu, which means sun in Sanskrit. The beloved or lover is called Pranayini. Trayitanu Pranayini. So where is the word Kamala? Where is the word Trayitanu Pranayini? Both sound very different. So what I am trying to impress upon you is the fact that the abundance of synonyms, the abundance of words in Sanskrit makes it easier for poets to employ a variety of meters in order to suit their purpose, to express different moods, to suit different contexts, etc. So this is about Śārdūlavikrīḍitam, its basic nature and how it yields itself to linguistic expression in Sanskrit. In the present paper, I have attempted to analyze Śārdūlavikrīḍitam in terms of literary concepts such as Shayya, Paka, Alankara, Guna, Riti, Vakrata, etc. I will be explaining them, each one of them with the various examples. Next slide please. So to start with, I have made use of a thing called Paka in Sanskrit literature. Paka in simple terms means the degree of ripeness, the degree of accessibility of sorts of a linguistic verse, of a linguistic expression. So what does this mean? You can see the 3 terms there. One is Draksha Paka, there is Kadali Paka. In the next slide you will come across something called as Narikela Paka, etc. The subheadings I am talking about. So Draksha Paka, the verse which has the Draksha Paka, it means that it can be readily savored. You need not have any great knowledge to understand or appreciate such a verse. Draksha paka essentially means it is like a grapefruit. You can just pop it up into your mouth and readily savor it. It does not require any undoing of the peel. It does not require you to break open the shell or anything of that sort. So it is just a fruit which you can readily savor. Then there comes the kadali paka, which is like a banana, where you have to unpeel the fruit and for you to enjoy. Next comes the coconut, which also comes with a hard shell. So you have to break it open. So that is kadali paka. Let's go to the previous one. To begin with, what I have done is, I have taken a single subject. The subject is Shiva, Bhagavan Mahadeva, and expressed in the same meter, Śārdūlavikrīḍitam. That is the meter we have chosen. But you can see, depending on the different types of paka, how the same vastu, that is Shiva, is treated very differently by different poets. For example, in the first verse, what do I mean when I say that this verse has Draksha paka? You can see this verse has just the synonyms of Shiva, which all of us know. Vande Shambhumumapatim Suragurum Vande Jagatkaranam Vande Pannaga Bhushanam Mrigadharam Vande Pashunam Patim Vande Surya Shashanka Vanhinayanam Vande Mukunda Priyam Vande Bhakta Janashrayancha Varadam Vande Shivam Shankaram. So we have all the adjectives of Shiva and the Kriya Pada Vande, I prostrate, I bow before, coming time and again. So this just means I bow before Shiva. That is the simple meaning. The subject is Shiva, and as I said, it can be readily savored. One need not have a high flown understanding of Sanskrit to know this verse. Next comes Kadali Paka. This is from Shivananda Lahari, which is traditionally attributed to Shankara Bhagavatpada. And what Bhagavatpada does in this verse is, he alludes to a concept that is very well known to us in terms of our Puranas. So we know that Shiva is the Adi Kirata. He is the primordial hunter, because he went behind the Yajna Murga and things like that, which was familiar to us from the Vedic lore itself. So Bhagavatpada makes use of this concept. And what does a hunter most enjoy doing? As is obvious from his own name, he enjoys hunting. He enjoys going behind his game. So Bhagavatpada says, you need not go elsewhere for hunting. Come reside in my own heart, because there is the Arishad Dvarga. There is Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsara, who assume the form of various beasts. So you can hunt down each of them and enjoy your game. So that is what Bhagavatpada does here. Magachatvam itastato girishabho mayeva vasankuru swaminadi kirata mamaka manah kantara simantare manah kantara simantare. So there is a rupaka which is done. Manaha, the mind itself, the metaphor, is likened to a forest, wherein the beasts in terms of this Arishad Varga, Kama, Krodha, etc. reside. And because Shiva is the Adi Kirata, he comes here, hunts down. And so what is the dhvani of this verse is that Shiva should reside permanently in my heart. That is what Bhagavatpada wants us to believe. So he is inviting Shiva to enter our hearts. So how is this verse different from the previous one? In the previous one, like we observed, there is just a string of adjectives, a string of attributes and the Kriya Pada. Whereas in this verse, there is a Puranic allusion to the Adi Kirata, etc. and there is an imagery involved. So it is a little more hard to access. That is why this comes as Kadali Paka. Next slide, please. Next we go on to Narikela Paka, and we will see why this comes with a hard shell-like substance outside its contour, which protects the inner core. If we see the coconut, it has the copra inside which we can savor. It even has the coconut water we can relish, but that requires to break open the coconut first. This verse is from the Malati Madhava. It is a prakarana. It is a nataka penned by Mahakavi Bhavabhuti. And this is the benedictory verse or the Nandi Padya of that. I shall just recite it. So even by going by the tonal quality alone, we can understand how this is different from the previous two verses. Chuda pida kapala sankula galan mandakini varayo vidyut prayala lata lochana shikhijwala vimishrat vishaha pantuttvama kathora ketaka shikha sandigdha mugdhem davo bhuteshasya bhujanga valli valayasrangnadha juta jataha. What is spoken of in this verse is the matted locks of Shiva. Srangnadha jutaha jataha. Jataha is the primary concern of this verse. So if you look at it, each line almost has a towering compound word, a samasta pada, which occupies the entire space of that word. So just by the tonal rhythm, chuda, pida, kapala, sankula, galan, mandakini, varayo. So the first verse ostensibly talks about Mandakini Varayaha, the Ganga which Shiva has on his head, and the waters which flow down. But in this verse, in the context of this verse, that acts as a Visheshana to Jataha. Srangnadda Jutaha Jataha Varayaha. So what does that mean? Shiva, in whose matted blocks Ganga is placed, and from whose Ganga the streams flow down. That is what it means. And even in the next 3 lines, there are different imageries which the poet uses to evoke the image of Shiva's matted locks. So the point I am trying to convey here is the fact that poets employ various degrees depending on their own propensities. So poets have different styles. I will come to the style in a bit, but this is just the amount of ripeness, like I said, paka. Now to go to a similar concept called guna. I think Dr. Sukanya also mentioned about gunas yesterday while speaking about bhamaha. It is the qualities, it is the virtues or the aspects which are different from the blemishes in poetry. So gunas, like we understand in everyday parlance, are virtues, our own virtues. So if you call a person as a suguni or a sadguni, it means he is a virtuous person. Similarly, there are certain qualities in poetry which make it virtuous or which make it a good piece of poetry. So what are those qualities? There are many, but they are all essentially boiled down into 3. One is prasada, one is madhurya, the other is ojas. So what do we usually look for in a piece of poetry? This is not restricted just to Sanskrit. This applies equally well to all pieces of poetry composed in any language. So the first is prasada. It has to be lucid, in that it should be readily understandable. The words should be in such a way that they are transparent. They should communicate their meaning and then retire. So they should be very clear. The word prasada itself means clear. It is perspicuous. It is immediately understandable. The next is madhurya. It should be sweet. There should be a certain sweetness to speech. And the next is ojas. Ojas means brilliance, something that captivates, something that attracts. So these are the 3 usual qualities that we come across in poetry. Let us see how each of these qualities have been reflected in Śārdūlavikrīḍita. So what I am trying to do is, there is a single meter which is giving rise or which is given free opportunities to explore all these poetic concepts, paka, guna, riti, etc. I will read out the verse. So the first guna is prasada. Prasada, like I said, is transparency. In the first verse, all of us, most of us would have heard of this verse. It is from Bhartrhari's Vairagya Shataka. Bhoge roga bhayam, kule chuti bhayam, vitte nrupalad bhayam, mane dainya bhayam, bale ripu bhayam, rupe jaraya bhayam, shastre vadi bhayam, gune khala bhayam, kaye kritantad bhayam, sarvam vastu bhayanvitam bhuvinranam, vairagyam eva bhayam. So Bhartrhari is writing Vairagya Shataka. He wants us to understand that renunciation alone brings fearlessness, causes fearlessness, because all other worldly things, worldly attributes, worldly attainments bring with them a certain sense of fear. So he goes on to say, Bhoge roga bhayam. If you are too much in worldly indulgence, then there is the fear of disease. If you set much store by your kula or your lineage, then there is the fear of falling from that great lineage, etc. So there are every worldly activity or every worldly possession comes with a feeling of fear that is attributed with it. So why is this verse an example of prasada guna? It is because bhoge roga bhayam. It is an independent statement or a statement unit within the context, within the larger context of the verse. Kule chuti bhayam. So kule sati chuti bhayam avashyam bhavatyeva. This is an entire statement which has been condensed into a very pithy phrase by Bhartrhari. Vitte nrupalad bhayam, etc. So when you hear these words uttered by a poet or when you read it out in a piece of book, they are immediately intelligible. That is why this has prasada guna. The next verse is an example of madhurya or sweetness. So in prasada guna, the large idea is that there should not be too many compounds. There should not be too many high flown expressions, rare words, things like that. So in madhurya, the syllables or the words used should be sweet on the ear, should be easy on the ear. it just follows common sense in that there are certain types of sound, there are certain types of expression that are easy on our ear. So in Madhuryam, this verse is taken from Prasanna Raghava of Jayadeva. So Jayadeva, he is not the author of Gita Govinda. This is another Jayadeva who has written a drama called Prasanna Raghava. He is particularly well known for his felicity of language, for how effortlessly he uses language, how he plays around with words and things like that. So that is why his expression, this verse especially, is an example of Madhurya. Just listen to this. Kim शीतांशु मरीचयः किमुसुरस्रोतस्विनी वीचयः किं वाकेतकसूचयः किमथ वाचन्द्रोपलानाञ्चयः इत्थञ्जातकुतूहलाभिरभितस्सानन्दमालोकिताः कान्ताभिस्त्रिदिवौकसान् दिशि दिशि क्रीडन्ति यत्कीर्तयः. In the context of the play, this is Vishwamitra introducing to perhaps Janaka the father of Rama and Lakshmana. So when Rama and Lakshmana go there, Janaka inquires, who are these boys? They look so accomplished. So Vishwamitra introduced them as the children of Dasharatha. So this is a description of Dasharatha, in that it is about the fame of Dasharatha. Fame, as per Sanskrit's poetic convention, is white in color. So the poet has used Dhavala Kirtihi, that is the expression. The poet has used various attributes of white. Sheetamshu Marichaya. Sheetamshu is the moon's rays are white in color. He is going on to describe, there is a sandeha, there is a confusion at every step. Is this the rays of the moon? Is this the waves of the Suraganga? Is this the petals of the Ketaki flower? Is this a moonstone? Chandropala is a moonstone. That is a stone when on which if the moon rays fall, it exudes water, that is Chandropala. So there are different things like that. So for our context, it basically means it is sweet on the ear. The next verse, just see how the tonal impact shifts from Prasada to Madhurya to Ojas. In this verse, the tonal impact, just when you listen to the verse, changes a lot. Gunjat kunja kutira kaushika ghata ghutkara samvalgita krandat pherava chanda dhatkriti bhruta pragbhara bhimaistataihi antah kirna karanka karkara payas samrodhi kulankasha sroto nirghama ghora garghara rava pareshmashanam sarit. This is from Bharbhuti's Malati Madhava again. See how it ties down very accurately with the context of the play, with the thing that is to be described. Here Bhavabhuti is describing a stream, a nadi or an alpasaras of sorts, which flows beside a cemetery, which flows beside a shmashanam, pareshmashanam sarit. Pareshmashanam means beside, on the other side of the shmashana, there is a stream flowing. So the atmosphere itself is quite scary, the atmosphere itself is quite grotesque, is some bibhatsa. So in order to bring that out, the poet has used such words. We call it as Shatranta Prayogas in Sanskrit, present continuous tense. Gunjat and Dhatkriti, Garghararava, these are sounds that imitate our own expressions. Anukarana Shabda, we call them. For example, yesterday Swaminiji herself mentioned tan tan ta tan tan ta ta tan ta tan taha, which imitates the sound of a pitcher of water falling down from a stream of stairs. When it falls down, it makes that sound. Garghararava, it imitates. So what the poet is trying to say here, on the banks of that river, which is itself situated on a cemetery or a shmashana, there are wild boars or there are creepers in whose exteriors or interiors there are all kinds of jackals, there are all kinds of owls which are making screeching sounds, and added to those noises themselves, there is the water gushing through, there is a head broken and the skull is stuck in the water stream. So when the water gushes forth, it also enters the empty sockets of the skull and it makes a gurgling sound, that is Garghararava. So in order to bring in all those concepts, the poet has used this meter, and which is an example of Ojas. Next slide please. So to quickly move ahead, we also have different styles, that is Marga or Riti, that is termed Marga or Riti in Sanskrit. Vaidarbhi Marga or Vaidarbhi Riti, Gaudiya, Panchali, etc. So going by the qualities that we have just encountered, that is lucidity, sweetness, brilliance, etc. Typically, a verse that is easy to understand is said to have the style of Vaidarbhi, or Vaidarbhi is said to be the style according to Dandi, etc., and poeticians. I won't go into all those details, which have all the poetic qualities. That is Ojas, Prasada, Madhurya, and Samata, etc. So Vaidarbhi, Kalidasa is said to exemplify this style, Vaidarbhi Riti, and this sometimes is also related to different provinces of India where the poet said to have lived, or where this style has found some prominence. So Vaidarbhi is from the Vidarbha Pranta, Panchali is from the Panchala Pranta, Gaudiya is from the Gauda Desha, etc. Not entirely one-on-one mapping, but largely speaking, that is the idea. So I won't go into these examples because these exactly reflect the concepts which we have discussed until now in terms of style, riti, etc. Next slide please. I will just read one of the verses, which exemplify the Gaudiya style. So when I spoke about the Ojas, the Guna, even that had compounds, but it had compounds that were somewhat unexpected, that were somewhat grandiloquent, that drew attention to themselves. But in this verse, because the poet here is Jayadeva, is Gita Govinda, he is known for his sweet sounding words. So even though this word has long standing compounds, it is still easy on the ear. So it is perhaps, according to our aestheticians, it is an example of Ojas because it is heavy on samasas, but it also has some madhurya to it. Unmilan madhugandha lubdha madhupavyaadhuta chutankura kridat kokila kakali kalaravairudgirna karanajvara niyamte pathikaih katham kathamapi dhyanavadhana kshana prapta prana samasamagama sukhollasaihi amivasaraha ullasaihi amivasaraha niyamte pathikaih. That is the idea. So the meaning is quite convoluted. It talks about how the ambience of Vasanta or spring is, though it is conducive, it makes the people who are lovers, who are distanced from their beloveds, it creates agony in them. That is what this verse talks about. So in the next example, it is an illustration of how poets can use compounded words and uncompounded words in a single verse. So if you see, this verse is from Niti Shadaka of Bhartrhari. The first half or the most part of the verse is filled with independent words. There are not samasta padas. Only the third pada, like you see, the third line is a single towering compound. I will quickly explain why this is essentially important. Kshutkshāmopi, jarakrishopi, shithila prayopi, kashtam dasham apannopi, vipanna didhitirapi, praneshu nashyatsvapi, mattebhendra vibhinna kumbhapishita grasayika baddhaspraha. This is the single compound. Kin jirnantrinamatti-mana mahatam agresarah kesari. This is an anyapadesha, like we would call. It is an allegory. It is an allegorical verse in which the explicit meaning which the poet says is something, and the suggested meaning is something else. So the suggested meaning is a virtuous person, a capable person, even if he is fallen into distress, he won't resort to doing which is way below his stature. He won't stoop down to that level. That is the import of the verse. So the image that the poet uses here is of a lion. A lion has grown old, it has become weak and emaciated, it has lost all its formal glory, etc. But even so, because it used to, in its heydays, it used to enjoy tearing down the temples of wild elephants in rut and enjoy the blood and flesh and everything, it won't eat, it won't feed on dried up grass. That is the import. So in order to impress upon us the Vaishamya, the contrast of how the lion was previously, it was all powerful. It used to bring down elephants, even a herd of elephants. But now it is not so. Kshutkshāmopi, it is hungry, it wants water. Jarakrishopi, it is brought down by old age. Shithila prayopi, it has become weak, all that. So the independent words, the broken up words, suggests to us the old age of the lion. It is lying there quite dormant, unable to doing anything, helpless. But whereas the third line, it brings to us the previous capabilities of the lion. Mattebhendra vibhinna kumbhapishita grasayika baddhaspraha. Every syllable in this verse, the entire verse, but in this compound specifically, is vyanjaka. It brings out a certain suggestion. So the suggestion is of a previous age of the lion. So this is how, simply put, poets have used the capability, linguistic capability of Sanskrit to their best of their effect. Next slide, please. I'll quickly go through just a few examples and then conclude. So the next literary device I have spoken about is alankara, is figure of speech. Figures of speech come in two shades, come in two varieties. One is figure of sound, shabdalankara, other is figure of sense, arthalankara. So in shabdalankara we have anuprasa, which itself has a lots of varieties, shrutyanuprasa, vrityanuprasa, etc. And there is yamaka. Yamaka basically requires the repetition of 3 or more syllables. Simply put, there are other rules as well of 3 or more syllables. So if you can see in the second verse there, which is emblematic of Yamaka Alankara, it says it is from Janaki Hirana, a Mahakavya written by Kumaradasa. You can see that the last 2 words almost in every line appears repeated, but there is a difference in meaning. Sanmanito manito, nashobhita shobhitaha, Dhamatulo matulo, Bruhadhama atulo matulo, Senaya senaya. So there are a minimum of 3 letters is repeated. So Śārdūlavikrīḍitam is accommodative enough to bring in these linguistic flourishes. Those 2 words have different meanings, but they appear same when they are first listened to. Next slide, please. The extreme of Shabda Alankara is what we call as Shabda Chitra. Just listen to this. Swachandochala dachakachcha kuharat chatetaraambuchata murchan moha maharshi harsha vihita snananhikanhayavaha dudya dadya vidya dudya dudara durduradari dirgha daridradruha drohodreka mahormi meduramada mandakini mandatam. It simply means mandakini asmakam mandatam vidyat. That is the import. Let the divine river Ganga, Mandakini, vidyat. Let she vanquish all our mandatam, our dullness. Let Mandakini take away our dullness. That is the import. So what does the poet do here? Mammata in his Kavya Prakasha gives this as an example of Shabda Chitra. Just when you listen to it, there is so much happening in this verse. All sorts of syllables, all sorts of conjunct consonants are brought together and made to come as one in this verse. So this is Shabda Chitra, an example of Chitra Kavya. Artha Chitra is interesting, so I will stop with this just one example. I will explain this example, it is very interesting. Dr. Ganesh mentioned this Kavya during the course of his deliberations yesterday. It is from a poetic work called Sita Ramana Samvada Jhari. It is perhaps one of the best examples of Chitra Kavya that we have in Sanskrit. In that, like Dr. Ganesh mentioned yesterday, Ravana comes before Sita, who is held captive in the Ashokavana in Lanka, and Ravana boasts about himself. He waxes eloquent about himself. Why? Because he wants to impress Sita. But Sita is not at all impressed by Ravana. So what she does in the 4th line, in the last line, so we have 3 whole lines of Ravana going on and about himself. Whereas in the 4th line, Sita just gives us a key to use the very words employed by Ravana, but in a different sense. Let us see how. In this verse, the 2nd verse here, Jushto mantri janena sangata dhiya madvanna kaschit prabhu. So Ravana is saying, many kings have many ministers, but among the best of the kings who have the best of the ministers, I am the supreme. I have the best council of ministers. Praptatyujvala-kirti samhatiraham tais charitrair nijaihi. So going by all the illustrious activities, the accolades that I have accomplished have accounted for my fame. My fame is all pervasive. That is what? Prapta atyujvala-kirtihi maya prapta adhikata. Ramo narhati tulyatam janakaje. Who is this fellow Rama? He is nothing in comparison to me. This is what Ravana says. Sangrama simhasya me. I am like a lion on the battlefield. Sarvam, now Sita says, the 3 lines is uttered by Ravana. Now Sita says, Sarvam Satyam. All this might be true. Param Sarvam Satyam Are. She does not even deign to address him with a reverential adjective. She says, Are Ravana, Sarvam Satyam, Param Tvanuchita Samnyasa Ekastava. This is a beautiful illustration where on the surface, Ravana, what he did, he came in the form of a hermit, as a sannyasi, kapata sannyasi, in order to take away Sita. So she is telling, if you were to have all these qualities that you just boasted of, you wouldn't have taken recourse to come in a kapata vesha, you would have come by yourself. You did not do that. So you took to deceit. So deceit does not befit a man with such an illustrious lineage or such an illustrious backing to himself. That is the explicit meaning. What is the implicit meaning? Samnyasa. Sam iti shabdasya, sam iti shabda bhagasya vanyasaha. The placement of the letter sam. So if you go through the 3 lines again and remove the letter sam, it gives the entire opposite meaning of Ravana. In the first line, I have underlined the syllable sam there. Jushto mantri janena. Sangata dhiya was the initial word. Now remove sam. What does it become? It becomes gata dhiya. It not becomes sangata dhiya, now became gata dhiya. Gata dhiya is a mindless person, who is a person who has lost his mind. In the second line, prapta tyujjala kirti samhati raham. Samhati is multitude, is a group. Whereas if you remove sam there, it becomes hatihi. Hatihi means killing, it means chopping off. Prapta adyujjala kirti hatiraham. It means he is bereft of fame, he does not have any fame at all. All he has is infamy. In the third line, Ramo narhati tulyatam janakaje, this is a very good chamatkara. Sangrama simhasya me becomes grama simha. Grama simha in Sanskrit means a dog. So what used to be a lion before, Sangrama simha, now becomes a dog. Grama simhasya me. So Ravana, it amounts to Ravana comparing himself to a dog, which is nothing on a battlefield. So these are some of the examples that I would like to present before you. There are a host of other examples as well, but I won't go into them. The basic idea is you can have conversations in verses. Generally, the idea is, just the next slide, I won't read it out, I'll just show it to you. The idea is, we usually associate conversation or dialogue with prose. That is what we usually happens, right? That is what usually happens. But whereas bringing in the same conversation within the context of a verse amounts to some chamatkara. So Śārdūlavikrīḍita is one such chandas which is eminently suitable to bring in conversation, because it is spread out, it has an even distribution of laghus and gurus, and like I said, it is suited to the linguistic rhythm of Sanskrit. So you can have conversations in verses, you can have a verse in which an entire story is captured. This is extremely remarkable. In one of the verses in Bhoja's Champu Ramayana, the episode of Dasharatha hunting down Shravanakumara's parents is narrated in a single verse. So with all the details of his parents being blind, of them being aged, of them going beside a stream to collect a pail of water, to fetch a pail of water, etc., everything is narrated within a single verse. So to understand this, you should contrast this with other meters. If you try to narrate an entire story using a different meter, even an accomplished poet finds it difficult. I think Dr. Ganesh himself can vouch for it from his experience. He has written lakhs of padyas. So it is very difficult. And so you can employ all sorts of linguistic devices, and not just in Kavya. I have an example here from Bhaskaracharya's Leelavati, which is a mathematical treatise. So even scholars whose aim is to expound on a concept here, mathematical concept. So here Bhaskaracharya has used it to describe a roots coefficient. So in order to get to know the square root of a word or some such thing, he has alluded to Arjuna hunting Karna on the battle. There is a verse which says Parthah Karna Vadhaya Margana, etc. The number of arrows that Arjuna uses to kill many people in the Mahabharata war, he says he used so many arrows to hunt down Karna, he used so many arrows to kill a horse maybe, to bring down Drona, and at the end of it, how many arrows did Arjuna actually use? This is a mathematical problem. So that is expressed in Śārdūlavikrīḍita. So the idea is the vritta, the chandas itself is so pliant, is so malleable that it can accommodate all sorts of linguistic flourishes. So with this I conclude. Thank you very much.
Aesthetics of meters, aesthetics of prosody, which is a virgin subject perhaps in Sanskrit. Only very few people in the earlier days, for example, Kshemendra of 10th century, later half of 10th century, a devout student, worthy student of Abhinavagupta, in his small treatise on the aesthetics of prosody by name Suvritta Tilakam, he mentions, but he has committed lot of errors. No hesitation in saying so. With due reverence, we have to accept that our predecessors, our earlier masters, they have shown the way. At the same time, they have erred here and there. By correcting them, we will not become better than them. We will not be showing our supremacy over them. But we have learned good lessons from them. And by virtue of that itself, we are trying to show a right path. And that has happened, especially by one great scholar from Karnataka, Sediyapur Krishna Bhatta, who is no more. He wrote a wonderful work, a very, very illuminating work by name Chandogati in Kannada. And that becomes a path-breaking treatise on the aesthetics of prosody. Because nowhere on earth we find meters of Sanskrit which are so unique. Because generally meter is associated with the talic rhythm. Talic rhythm means that rhythm which follows the pattern of time. Means like people who are carried away by time, and such people are many in number. So are very, very many meters, very many chandas belonging to various languages, starting from Japanese language up to all the European languages. Everywhere we see the same feature. And even in the regional languages, whether it is in Kannada or Telugu or Tamil or Oriya, Hindi or Bengali, whatsoever, every language, if at all it has its own meters, that meter can be sung to a tal, teen tal, ek tal, jap tal, deep chandi, like that we have in music. So also, taka dhimi, taka jano, dada dinna, takita, 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 taka, takita, taka, takita, taka, taka dhimi, taka chando, takita, taka dhimi, takita, taka chando. You can certainly feel how different they are. But in Sanskrit we have the same meters and yet another set of meters where they transcend time. Something like a real Jivan Mukta who is not carried away by the flood of time and he stands beyond time. So are some of the meters of Sanskrit which transcend time, and they are called Laya Rahita. Means they don't have destruction. Other meters, they are Layanvita. They are mortal meters, while Sanskrit meters are immortal. Not to just boast the supremacy of meters, why I am saying is, our ancestors, our Vedic wisdom, it focused more on this transcendental nature and the ethereal nature which would go beyond time, which would go beyond destruction. Yesterday, Swamiji was speaking about Nasato Vidyate Bhavaha, Nabhavo Vidyate Sataha. This is what happening in the case of Sanskrit meters. And classic example of them is the Anushtup Shloka or the Jagati meters, derivative Vamshastha or Vasanta Tilaka. All of us would have heard the Suprabhatam meter. For example, Shesha Drishekara Vibhotava Suprabhatam, everyone who is devoted to Tirupati, Tirumala temple would have heard. Pratar Bhajami Hridisam Spuradatma Satvam Satchit Sukham Paramaham Sadatim Turiyam Yatsoptajagara Sushuptim Avaiti Nityam Tad Brahma Nishkalamaham Nacha Bhuta Sangha. This is a wonderful morning melody which is beyond the timed rhythm. It goes beyond that. I'm not going to those areas. And to that genre, we have Śārdūlavikrīḍita. I rate these 3 meters, Anushtup Shloka, Vasanta Tilaka and Śārdūlavikrīḍita are some of the finest examples, the shortest being Anushtup Shloka, the biggest, the longest being Śārdūlavikrīḍita, and the middle order one is Vasanta Tilaka. Such meters are the real treasures of Sanskrit. Best of the Sanskrit verses are found here. It means when Valmiki realized the Anushtup meter, how it has to be employed in a kavya, earlier it existed only in the Veda. When once from the Vaidika to Laukika, he realized that meter, Shloka eva tvaya baddha natra karya vicharana machchanda devate brahman pravutteyam saraswati. Like that, Valmiki has been assured by Bhagavan, Brahma, Chaturmukha Brahma, the creator. Creator coming and appreciating another creator, that is poet. Poet is another creator who creates in the world of language. creates in the world of ideas, but Brahma creates in the world of matter. And he is much marveled by the creator who works in the domain of ideas, which is the area of his consort Saraswati. So Brahma has a lot of appreciation for those who work in the domain of his beloved wife Saraswati. Likewise, really a poet realizing the meter is a very great momentous occasion, and Śārdūlavikrīḍita is one such. By knowing such things, we can know how Indians, how our ancestors, how the Vedic wisdom is creatively different from others. Just not to boast that we are different, we are different. We are different, of course, but inclusively different, not exclusively different. Our difference is not in exclusivity, it is in inclusivity that is in tune with Vedanta, that is in tune with Advaita, and this can always be realized in any art, whether it is music or dance or painting or sculpture or cookery whatsoever, in any science, any meta science like Vedanta. With all the religions, they say that be devoted to your Lord. Vedanta says, you are the Lord. Apart from you, there is nothing else. So, the very second thing itself is the seat of all fear. Vidyā bhayam bhavati, so says the Upanishad. This way, there is no second thing. Thinking that there is a second thing itself is a misnomer. That is avidyaka. This way of approach which assures a lot of abhaya. So understanding and that way knowledge, jnana is the only abhaya. Abhayam vai praptosi janaka. This element can be seen in all the Vedangas, whether it is in Vyakarana or in Shiksha or in Kalpa or whatsoever. For example, in Vyakarana, we have samasas. Some samasas have Purva Pada Pradhana, and some have Uttar Pada Pradhana, some have Anya Pada Pradhana, and some have Ubhay Pada Pradhana. Karmadharya is Ubhay Pada Pradhana. Rameshwara means Ramo Yasya Ishvaraha Rameshwara is Anya Pada Pradhana. Ramasya Ishvaraha Rameshwaraha is Purva Pada Pradhana. Whether it is Bahuvrihi or Tatpurusha, ultimately we have Karmadharya, Ramascha Sau Ishvarascha. He is Rama and he is Shiva, both. In that way, this amount of inclusivity realizing through non-duality. Our inclusivity is not something like a superficial notion. It is not brooming away all the dust below the carpet. It is coming out of all such inhibitions and then ultimately realizing the non-duality of the whole existence, where even meter also provides a way. This is how to appreciate and understand Indian mind is to appreciate the universal mind also. I'll always be saying what is very unique about India is that anything essentially Indian is essentially universal also. This cannot be said so in whether in Greece or in Rome or in Arabia or in Australia or in America or whatsoever. It is only in India. Anything essentially Indian is basically universal. This magnanimity and this profundity is seen, and one such illustrious example is Chandas Shastra, and how Shastra will be aiding for art can also be seen here, and that has been wonderfully brought out. I congratulate him and I also thank the organizers and thank our Ārsha Vidyā Gurukula and this conference for giving this opportunity to present such ideas. Thank you. Namaskar.